Advisory Council to call the webinar to order. Good morning, everyone. First off, my name is Tosia Jose, and I am the Program Director and Convener of the WWR community. I am only here because I have a solid group of very accomplished women that make up the WWR Advisory Council that continue to steer the ship of this community. And I'm especially excited to announce that our chairwoman, Mrs. Jumoke Akinomi, is in the house. Thank you very much, ma'am, for joining.
Thank you
And
very
because
much.
she's a stickler for time, we're not going to keep anyone waiting a minute longer. Thank you very much, Ma. If you may just use your video, if possible, so that the people in attendance can recognize you. Okay. She has a very busy day. Morning, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining.
I'm so sorry. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all. Happy International Women's Day. Hi, Tilda. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Hi,
Thank you, ma'am.
good to see you too.
It'll be okay for you to turn off your video now. I know you are in transit.
Thank you.
And we would not like to bother you too much. Okay, so we have some other of our advisory council members here. Mrs. Tilda Injeri is a member of the advisory council and our lead researcher. Research is very important to the work we do in advocacy. Yes, she's also agreed to be one of our speakers today. We have Mrs. Ada Chibweke, who's the secretary of the advisory council, also here with us. Some of the other advisory council members will join in the course of the day. It's International Women's Day, so a lot of people have their schedules packed with all sorts of speaking engagements and the like. So I would recognize them as they join the meeting. But right now we're going to start. Before I introduce our speakers, I will take a moment to speak a little bit about what the WWR community stands for. We are an advocacy group and a large community of women, and what we have positioned in the market to do is to unlock women's financial potential through real estate investments. The community is made up of a lot of very ambitious women that are led by renowned female thought leaders who have committed to inspiring, guiding, and empowering each other to achieve wealth creation and financial freedom. We believe in equal access to opportunities, particularly in the real estate space, and the need for women to aspire to achieve financial independence and wealth creation. Our mission is to empower women to take control of their financial future through real estate investing. And we do this by providing a supportive community where education, access to mentorship, and inspiration for investments and wealth creation is top of mind. So we create access to finance, access to information, access to mentorship, and most importantly, elevating our voice to continue to drive for parity between men and women in society. Today, we particularly think that it's important for us to raise our voices to the global call for parity and the global call to accelerate change for the female gender. And we are particularly going to be speaking around the subject of why Africa needs to begin to drive parity in property ownership and wealth now. It has become an urgent imperative for this to be done if we want to achieve any kind of meaningful growth across the continent. And therefore, we think that today is a very important day for us to elevate our voices, for us to call on the community, particularly the women themselves, to say we must support each other, we must come together, we must realize that Africa's collective ambition sits on our shoulder, and that we have a significant role to play. We also have a very ardent supporter of women in the build sector in Africa, John Orman. And one of the reasons why he's sitting here is because we are making a strong statement that collaboration is very important, and that the male folk need to support, need to lend their voice, not just, in cosmetic ways, but in ways that would meaningfully support women and the girl child to achieve parity, support them to reach their full potential, which would, ultimately lead to the kind of growth and the kind of future that we want for the continent. So thank you very much. I acknowledge everyone that is in here right now. We have about 22 people that have joined the meeting. I think this is a good number for us to start. So I would take the time to quickly introduce my panelists, and thereafter we start the conversation. So thank you very much, everyone. I'll start with John Orman. He is the founder and CEO of Construct. Construct is a property technology company that is making a lot of enviable change in the build sector in Africa. He's a visionary leader and an innovator in the construction industry. And he is the founder and CEO of Construct, where he leads a team of professionals in revolutionizing the construction landscape in Nigeria and Africa. They have equal representation of men and women on their leadership, and that's very enviable for us. His leadership style is characterized by inspiration, innovation, and collaboration. He fosters the culture of excellence by driving his team to raise the bar for the construction industry in Africa. He is a mentor's mentor. He extends his impact beyond the construction sites, mentoring female entrepreneurs through their journey and contributing to the Premier Business Network, a community of thought leaders in business and innovation. I see somewhere here that he also coaches young people. Is a basketball coach for a young team of basketballers that I believe are in high school. Mr. John Orman has consistently been a visible face at all our WWR events. Not only does he show up, he also puts some financial support behind what we are doing, and we are really very excited to have him join the webinar today. You're welcome, Mr. John Orman. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you so much for it's an absolute pleasure.
Quickly, I would introduce Mrs. Tilda Injiri. Tilda is currently the analytics head at Amahoro Coalition. Previously, she's worked in both Estate Intel and Knight Frank, and she's played such a very massive role in driving data in the build sector in Africa. A lot of the innovative solutions that have come out of Africa have been driven by some of the phenomenal work that she's done in data analytics for the continent. She is responsible for building the coalition of analytics infrastructure and identifying emerging trends to generate high-level insights and learning on the forcibly displaced landscape across sub-Saharan Africa. Her knowledge and experience spans key markets, including the East, West, Southern, and Northern Africa. She holds a bachelor's degree in real estate from the University of Nairobi and an MSc in analytics and consultancy from the Heriot-Watt University in the United Arab Emirates. Thank you so much, Tilda. Tilda is also a regular face at our events. She always opens our events, giving us data insights on what is happening across the continent. And that has made significant impact to some of the strides that we are making. She's also responsible for helping us track impact and growth in the women community. Thank you so much, Tilda, for joining us. We have you here today, and your breadth and understanding of Africa is going to color the conversation very richly. So thank you so much. I'm going to start by asking both of you. The theme for this year's International Women's Day is, can anybody tell us what the theme is? Please feel free from the audience. You can just mute your microphone and tell us what the theme for this year's International Women's Day is.
Accelerate action.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rita. Thank you so much. So the theme is accelerate action. We particularly have been a huge voice in driving conversations around parity, wealth parity, pay parity, leadership parity, participation parity, opportunities parity in the market. And so my question will be, how far have we come? It's 30 years since the Beijing conference of 1995, and a lot of engagements and conversations have been happening in Africa and even across the world. Is it lip service? Is there commitment from governments? Is there commitment from the private sector? Is there commitment from corporate leadership? Or is it all talk? I'll let John go first and then Tilda can speak. So how far have we come 30 years on?
Fantastic. Thank you so much again for the opportunity, Tosin. I had a smile on my face when you asked what the theme was, because at the time I didn't know what it was. I mean, it's just been a crazy, few days. But when I hear accelerate action, I'm excited because it's sort of tied to what I had decided to do today. So when I got the invitation and I saw that I was speaking beside Tilda, I said, there's no contest. I'm not going to even touch data when Tilda is in the room. I'm going to speak about what I really strongly stand for and believe in, which is action, and what do we need to do. So when I hear that the theme is actually accelerate action, it gives me a lot of joy because it's in line with my thinking. I think, just to set the tone for some of the things I will be saying, I want to speak very, very on the floor, very realistic, very, real to what I believe. Growing up as a young man, I was born in the early 1980s. So you have a sense of, where I am. It was women that were sent to courses like home economics and men to technical drawing. It was a natural thing, at least in Nigeria, that I know, right? And it occurs to me that the way we raised our girls back in the day was the beginning of what we now call the lack of parity. Because if you were saying that girls should play with dolls and then boys should do the other more almost lucrative sports, then that already is sending a signal. And what that means is that as far as the girls who were in primary school, secondary school at the time, made to do what were seen as female courses are the women of today, then we already have a problem. And so I think if I was to answer your question directly, I think we've come a bit of a way. Have we come far enough? The answer is no. The fact that we have now started encouraging women to be entrepreneurs, to invest in real estate, to even be able to have these conversations is some progress. The question is it enough progress? And I think the answer to that question is no. Now, this is why, for me, action will be the next thing to talk about, which is what are we supposed to do to make the progress? And I know Tilda will go into a lot of the things that the government should do, a lot of the things that the corporate should do, but I like to talk about a lot of the things that we on this call can and should do. The first thing I want to talk about is how we raise our girls. Because the women of the next 20 years are girls today. In fact, the women of the next, let's say, 18 years, 16 to 18, are girls today. And what we are saying to them today is going to shape what we will see in 16 to 18 years. You talked about construct and how we try to balance the gender. We went to, because construct, we deal with building materials, and so the specific class that we focus on is the quantity surveying class. The class of 2023, for example, had 58 students, out of which only 7 were girls or females. And that was a significant improvement from the class before. Now, if out of 58, only 7 are girls, you can already begin to see what that is going to do to the industry that these people are going out to. It means if one gets married and maybe decides to travel abroad with her husband, that's one less one. If anything happens to 3 people, we have only practically 5 female quantity surveyors from that class in the University of Lagos. So the question is, what are we saying to our girls? Are we teaching them that they are only good for hair and makeup and those fancy things? Or are we teaching them that their voice is equal from home? And if a girl is not used to being treated as an equal in the house, what is the chance that she will speak up when she gets to a workplace? When even her dad and her mom have made her feel that she's secondary to her brother, or she's relegated to certain tasks that her brother is not. Interestingly, God blessed me with twins. So both boy and girl, same age, and I'm raising them at the same time. In fact, one may argue that I even spend more time on my girl because I know that the society won't spend as much time making her feel confident. So I even have to do a lot more sort of reinforcement from home. The other thing that I say to women is, please, if you can't be part of the solution, don't be part of the problem. It's the saddest thing when a woman, I try not to be political when I speak in public, but it's the saddest thing when a woman is going through a challenge and voices of women are also raised against her. It's like, let's assume the men are mad. Are we mad too? So for me, in terms of action and actions that we on this call can take, I say, if you can't be part of the solution, please keep quiet. Don't be part of the problem. Don't be the reason another woman will not be able to speak up when she's being treated unfairly. The third thing I also always try to add is that don't wait to be great before you think you have something to do or to give. The Bible talks about he that is faithful with little will be faithful with much. If you're not faithful with little, you will not do much more when you get much more. I believe every woman on this call is in an office, is in a place, somewhere where there's another woman. Begin to lend your help. When we were younger, they used to give us the ORT, salt and sugar solution. Now, there's supposed to be a balance with which you mix the salt, the sugar, and the water. If you have erroneously poured too much sugar, you need to pour more salt. If the world is already very male-dominated and male-inclined, there is no being fair. In fact, being fair is emphasizing, making sure my HR knows there are some roles, there are some, in fact, for all our roles, we will consider a woman first.
Thank you, Mr. Omen. I'm going to need you to wrap up now so that we can hear Tilda's perspective on the question. Please wrap up. Please wrap up. You can still wrap up.
Yes. So there's nothing like trying to be fair in an already unfair situation. So I think importantly, what we all do here act as the little drops of water that add to the ocean of the change that we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Tilda, how far have we really come? You have the data set. What is the data saying to us? How far has Africa come?
Yes, thank you so much, Hussein, and thank you for having me today. It's indeed an honor and privilege, and you've called on me before, and I always answer, and I'm always delighted to be part of this platform. When you look at how far we've come, I think we still need to understand some context, especially in terms of land and housing. So essentially, when you look at the numbers currently in terms of women's participation in land and housing, women participate about 70% of the whole land and housing ecosystem. But then it's as if women participate from a proxy perspective. So whether through their husbands, whether through the other men in their lives. So essentially, in terms of ownership, women own about 13% of housing or can claim sole ownership of 13% of housing and about 15% of land. Now, when you compare that to men, essentially for men own about 36% of housing across sub-Saharan Africa and about 75% of the land that's essentially banked and trackable. Now, when you look at the numbers, they may look a bit discouraging, but as John said, we have to look at the history in terms of where we've come from. One front that we're doing very well in sub-Saharan Africa is from a policy perspective. When you look at different countries and the different laws, you will see that most countries currently recognize women's rights to land ownership, to owning property and housing and everything essentially. So on the policy perspective, we can't really point to government in terms of lack of enabling laws. At least there's still some work to be done, but at least we are trying. Now, in terms of now the implementation and the execution, and then now the confidence for women to now take up this space and now leverage the available policies to move the needle, in my opinion, I think that's where we are struggling. But the encouraging thing, or it's not really encouraging, but it's also understanding that it's not just in Africa where we are struggling. Women across the world essentially are struggling with these low numbers of land ownership, of property ownership. We are currently all at less than 25% globally in terms of ownership. So then the becomes to what extent can we even move the needle by about even 5%, maybe over the next 5 years, over the next decade, and exactly what can we do and what is the role of organizations such as our own in terms of making the impact on this front, essentially. So yes.
Thank you so much, Tilda. I'm still going to stay with you because I want you to help us dimension some of the data that I think I have, right? So as of 2025, the gender pay gap in the housing sector is still about 80%, meaning that men will potentially earn 80% more than the women, right? Even when they are doing the same quality of tasks or working in the same sector or the same industry. As of 2025, 35% of Africans are living in multidimensional poverty. More than two-thirds of that number are women. As of 2025, only 12% of women have access to housing finance. As of 2025, only 10% of women are leading in C-suite roles in the housing sector. As of 2025, majority of the women-owned and led businesses in the housing or real estate sector is tilted more towards marketing, brokerage, and sales. We're not really seeing the women showing up in construction. We're not really seeing them showing up in housing finance and all the other, core sectors of this market. So my question to you will be, what is our expectation? One, from government, two, from private sector, and three, from us women ourselves. What would you say is the expectation?
Thanks, Susan, and thank you for sharing the numbers. And yes, what you're talking about is absolutely correct, especially in our sector, that's the built environment. Now, one, of course, in most cases, the issue of of being left behind always then results in some really low numbers when you look at disparities. So, for example, if women have not actively been involved in C-suite roles, for example, in the built environment, that also means that when now they become visible in the built environment, they are coming in at the entry level kind of roles, at the mid level kind of roles. It's obviously you have to complement now this participation with the issue of merit, because of course being in a C-suite role also means that you've had some kind of experience in this sector. And if you've previously not been involved in this sector, it's very difficult to come in and then just be you're the CEO of this and this group. So also, as you rightly mentioned, then when there's disparity in the level of roles that women are taking up, then of course we'll have a very big pay gap that exists between women and men. There's also the perception, as you've rightly put it, of pink jobs. You'll find that yes, women are still playing in marketing, communications, and HR. And by the way, when you look at the levels that women are playing at, they're doing a very good job, right? And those are also the roles that are typically more open and more welcoming to women. It's a whole other thing when maybe a woman wants to be a site engineer. And I always say there's some very small issues that also exist in some of this, let's say, outdoorsy kind of jobs that can also be an impediment of women taking up this roles. Because as a woman, there's also the sense of you fighting upstream or going upstream in some of these cases. You go to a site, you don't even have suitable washrooms even for women. So you're taking up these roles, but the environment and the ecosystem is also not favorable. So you have to be so resilient to actually want to break the ceiling in this space. And I think that's also why when we have days like International Women's Day, we laud all these women who've taken up spaces in areas where it would ideally be very hard to play at as a woman. So what do we need to do also at these levels? I think most of the times when government talks about affirmative action, sometimes it usually looks as if we are favoring the women. And one of the things that you'll notice is that even when women's representation is about 10% in a sector, it always looks like women are overrepresented. One, just because of the kind of visibility that they're having, and also just because of the kind of good work that women are doing. So essentially, when women are at about 10%, you will think we're at 50%. And then it becomes, oh, we are favoring women too much, or we are having too many opportunities for women. And it's just that that one woman is doing way too much, in the sense that people are now getting the sense that women are being favored, which is not always the case. So the case of affirmative action and pushing for spaces, and I think it's also usually the idea of equity. If I have the merits, if I'm qualified to do something, create an easy enough path for me to take up the space to be part of the ecosystem. I think at a corporate level and a private sector level, and I think for some of the companies, we can already say this, there are roles that will be advertised and the preference is essentially towards more women. So you will see that even the barriers to entry, the kind of consideration is trying to favor more women, and it's essentially not favoring, it's leveling the playground. Because as we talked about, if you've previously not played in this sector, the kind of obvious thing is to get someone who's been playing in the sector, but then that just means you'll end up getting the men who've been playing in the sector. So it's essentially having the considerations for what else can we do to have more female representation. And I think one of the things that you'll see even from a data perspective is when women are also playing at a decision-making level in different companies, then there's definitely more growth in revenue. There's also definitely a different perspective, basically. Diversity in whatever shape or form, not just gender, always brings favorable results to different companies. So it's just that. At individual levels, I think it's having women have the power to ask and appreciate the need for asking. I think it's also taking away the timidness from some of these issues. I think it's us being able to lift our hands and say, you know what, I don't know how to do this now, but I can figure it out and I want to try. So because no matter how much we advocate for inclusivity, no matter how much we advocate for women being given these options, if us ourselves are not willing to try and to also do a good job at it, it will always be the same narrative and cliche narrative in the sense of we've been giving women these opportunities and they're not trying hard enough. So yes, I think those are some of
Fantastic.
the things that we need to do.
Thank you so much. Back to you, John. One of the things that I have always, worried about is ambition, the level of ambition that we ourselves as women have. And I like what Tilda said, that sometimes we need to break the timidity and put ourselves forward for opportunities. At the end of the day, many times what you find is when those opportunities even open up, women may not be willing to take the opportunities. Sometimes because we fear that we don't have the competence, some other times because we fear that we are not able to withstand the strain or the stretch that comes with those opportunities. Some other times, perhaps because of what you spoke about the way people are wired from their early childhood days into adulthood. I would like you to speak about ambition and how we can empower women to have higher expectations of themselves, higher expectations of the next generation, and then support people to actually, come out and desire parity. Because sometimes it will seem like we women don't even desire parity.
Absolutely, and I think you're very spot on. I always sort of divide my approach to life into two buckets: the things I have power to control and the things I don't have the power to control. And I try to focus on the things I have the power to control. I think one of the things that we have the power to control is how we model ourselves as well. So, like you rightly said, why should a woman desire something if she has never seen it as important? It has never been modeled to her as important. What has been modeled to her all her life has been a different direction, right? And then all of a sudden today, we want, women to have this ambition. I think making sure that we're modeling the right things and that we're promoting the right things will be one very strong way to go. I always say that timidity and confidence, I don't think are natural traits. What I mean by that is that I don't think a child is born confident or a child is born timid, but they are sort of learned behaviors based on factors. A child, for example, that feels safe to make a mistake would naturally tend towards being more confident because they understand that mistakes are sort of like lessons and are the path to success. So I think that this is where some of the softer elements come in. As a community, we must all understand that our every actions have an impact, whether we're thinking about it or not, and now be more deliberate with the actions that we put forward, understanding that the impact would either be the next person either being more confident or more timid or more ambitious or not. Now, if a woman has been raised to think that most of her life will be about raising a child, and then today you want her to be ambitious, you see that it's counterintuitive, right? But as we continue to model greatness amongst women, like Tilda said, 10% of women are making great impact. It's actually a good thing, right? For you're mute. You're mute, Tosin.
Sorry.
That's
Let me crave your indulgence to recognize in the middle of your answering the question the presence of the Redan president, Mr. Akintoye Adeoye. Thank you so much for joining us. This sends a very strong signal to our community that you support women, because I'm not even sure that you are here because we sent a formal invite.
Okay, thank you so much, and I'm enjoying the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. John, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for being here, sir. And yes, so basically, I guess the other thing is being deliberate about tracking our progress. You know, you can't improve anything that you don't track, which is why I was very excited about sort of like the data that, you know, Tilda has been able to share with us. So we have a sense of where we are and we have a sense of, you know, what we need to do. I think the softer issues are where culture is where you really fix the issue of women's ambition, and where you fix the issue of women's, you know, also being willing to come out. The government can do the laws, can bring favorable policies, but the implementation is done by people, right? And culture is built by what you applaud and what you penalize. When you show strong applause for a certain action, it sends a strong signal to people that this is encouraged. And so I think things like what you are doing, which is celebrating women on Women's Day, on in the month, you know, putting up conversations like this where we can spread the awareness, are very key, because we need to get it into our culture, into the fabric of our being, that ambition is not the preserve of the male gender. It is actually something that both genders are supposed to be open to having. And I think, you know, little steps along the way will make big impact over time. We're trying to change generations of a certain mindset. It probably will take some generations as well to do it.
So thank you so much. I'm just going to put it out there that I'm going to open for, you know, the audience to participate in a little while. But before I do that, Mrs. Akiumi, I'm going to bring you on very shortly to speak about mentorship and our role towards the next generation. But before I do that, Tilda and John, I would like us to touch on something else about wealth and how women, you know, understand the wealth play and how they want to participate in it. When Tilda was speaking previously, she mentioned something around participation by proxy. Okay, one of the things that we have found is that many times women, a lot of women, are only able to extend themselves towards being beneficiaries of wealth from the men in their lives. And this is 2025, right? So we're comfortable to have conversations about marrying up or marrying well, as it were. We're comfortable about having conversations around, starting a business, you know, because, you know, you've got support from maybe some of the financial supporters that you have in your life. By that I mean maybe your parents or your spouse. Sometimes we still don't see that frame of possibility where women actually think that they have the capacity to compete, you know, in the marketplace, to compete in the business place, in the workplace, just as much as the men, and have a deliberate pathway to growing wealth. My question is, how do we address this concern? Sometimes you see women will say to you, I'm just okay if I'm able to, you know, maybe change my car every 5 years, be able to go on vacation every once in a while. But not a lot of women are looking to become an Aliko Dangote, where you are leading a sector, where you are driving innovation and change, and you are, you know, a major force to reckon with. My question is, how do we begin to, you know, elevate this desire? And we've seen women that are they've occupied the highest seats in government or in private sector, and once they leave the scene, they become quiet. You don't hear about them anymore. I don't see that, you know, easy transition and continuous growth in ambition. So my question is, how do we continue to accelerate nothing is impossible. I'm not looking at that I cannot buy from.
Tilda, can you hear me? I'm confirming that we're losing Tosin.
Yeah, I can hear you. I think we are losing her.
Okay.
We have lost her.
Do you want to take a stab at the question while we wait for her?
I can.
Hello, Tilda. Good morning. This is Ada.
Hi,
Good
Ada.
morning,
How are
Mr.
you?
John. Yes, please, we can proceed. You can proceed with the question while we wait for Tosin. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. I'll attempt to take a stab in terms of the context that Tosin has given, and that's essentially women's access to wealth and also their attitudes towards wealth. And for me, essentially, I usually say when I look at some of these issues, I usually look at the proxies or what we would call key indicators towards this issue. So number one, when you look at some of the key indicators, the first thing, and I usually look at this thing because number one, there has been a lot of effort towards this specific industry and this specific context, and there has been a lot of barriers. Tosin, I started answering your question just based on the context that you were giving. So I hope that's fine.
Yeah, she's dropped off again, so you can go ahead.
You're muted. Mrs. Tosin, you're muted.
I'm so sorry. I turned off my connection in error. I'm so sorry. Sorry, everyone. Please go ahead, Tilda.
So I was saying one of the proxy that I usually look at, especially in this conversation, is essentially SMEs and women's participation in SMEs, just because of how much effort and how much input we've had from governments and everyone trying to level the ground in terms of SMEs. And when you look at Africa, essentially, women own about 40% of SMEs. But the interesting thing is, even as all women own about 40% of SMEs, we have about 20% of them being able to access institutional financing. Now, on the flip side, when you look at women's participation in the economies, women control up to 20 trillion US dollars in worldwide spending. So the people who are spending money, the people who are using money, big fraction of that. To other proxies such as owning bank accounts or essentially just being in the formal financial system, we see that essentially women, about 49% of women in sub-Saharan Africa actually own financial bank accounts. The reason I'm looking at this proxies is that in the journey to building up wealth, then you need to tick some certain boxes for you to be able to, number one, when you talk about Dangote, he didn't just get to where he got to by just waking up and being in the ecosystem. He had to access financing. He had to be able to set up companies. He had to be able to get the kind of support, government support that he needs to actually be then actively an active participant in building wealth and also being a very key figure to this. Now, I'm sure one of the issues that is very critical then, and in terms of answering this question, is then understanding why is it that only 20% of women who own SMEs have access to institutional finance. And one of the things that you find is that then again, the issue of pink jobs of pink activities comes in, because you'll find that even when women own 40% of SMEs, some of the sectors and industries that they are economically active in are essentially sectors that are overlooked by financial institutions, and also the kind of things that you need, the guarantors and all those things. It's in terms of understanding, do women have access to all this? So it sounds like a daunting task, but for me, in terms of the initial thing to consider is what kind of access or network or ecosystem support do then women have from other women? And I think it brings us to the importance of number one, being able to look up to other people and being able to actually connect to the one woman that we know who's playing in this sector, or to the few women that we know, for them to be able to provide their guidance, for them to be able to provide their support. It's essentially being able to lift other people up. It's then also understanding, even from a government perspective, what's enabling activities. I think one of the things that you've seen with most of the supporting systems that are coming up is the ability to pull funds and things like that to act as guarantors for women, so that people are able to access necessary machinery and things like that, so that then helps them to move the needle. So there's a lot in terms of this context and discussion, but for me, the one thing that I can point to is the ability to have an ecosystem of support for women who can then be able to help other women then jump the hurdles, and also to be able to see, again, we can't aspire for what we don't have. So the more we can see other women who are actively playing in this field and actually doing the big numbers, then the more it looks as if it's a possible journey, and the more it looks as if this is actually feasible to do. So yeah, I think that helps.
Okay. I think Mrs. Akiwumi is still here. I have a question for you, and I'm sorry to have put you on the spot. I had kind of tried to give you some kind of lead time, but I would like to. I'm just checking if Mrs. Akiwumi is still here. Mentorship for the next generation. A lot of the conversations we've had and a lot of policy direction that the governments in Africa are driving are focused on women like you and I that are possibly already in our prime and trying to give access and opportunities for us to take on positions, for us to achieve wealth parity, to achieve opportunity parity. It will seem like a lot of times we are not deliberate enough about the next generation. And what I mean is, how are we modeling what we want to see to the girl child? Whether we are looking at it from a perspective of how they are, how they get inspiration, or the value system in the home front, or we're looking at it from school, the kinds of nuanced communication that the girl child is being faced with in school. I still see, because I have a teenage girl child, and I still see that sometimes all these, you know, internal issues still seem to be rearing up. Some of the challenges I dealt with when I was in high school more than 25 years ago is still flaring up. So how deliberate are we about mentorship, and what kind of mentorship do the next generation of girls need to be more, better positioned and more aware in the way that they will navigate life, so that they don't face the kind of challenges that a lot of us are facing, whether it is from ambition, confidence to take up opportunities, or drive, or lending our voice to the parity call, being able to drive some of these hard conversations. John, I'd like you to speak on that first of all before I go to Tilda. And please, if you would like to make a contribution on the webinar, just indicate by a raise of hand. I would really like to hear our voices, because women's voices must not be minimized. I'd be more than happy to allow you have some time to speak on the subject. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think the theme of today, is very key, to answering the question, which is accelerate action. So talk is good, data is good, but the importance of the conversation and the data is to know the actions that we need to take and to start to take. I think, you know, there's a lot of great ideas in the minds of people who just the ideas just end up in their minds, and it is us beginning to hold ourselves accountable, you know, to have very actionable sort of topics that we deal with, you know, within periods where we're holding ourselves accountable. So, for example, you know, we talk about accelerating action, but going further to break that action into things that we can do. We can have a campaign over time where we say mentor a girl child today, and everybody, for example, is challenged to pick up one female at least, because of course there's the reality that you have a job to do, you have, you know, things to do, and you have limited time as a woman as well. But if you said, you know what, for the next 6 months I'm going to pick up one girl, and 30 of us did that, and those of us who can pick up two, that means we've already started making that conscious effort to mentor, you know, the next generation of girls that will soon be women. The reality, I must say, is that it will take some time, right? And no good thing comes easy, really, especially when it hasn't been the norm in the past. But I think importantly, we mustn't despair. And I always encourage women, if anybody else does, you don't, please. We mustn't despair. We must focus on the little bits of actions that we can put together, and we must do them with the future in mind. There's a very, very important word in business and in developing anything great, which is delayed gratification. Sometimes the outcomes of your effort take time, and we must be sort of willing to tarry. We must be sort of willing to suffer long, to be on it. And the truth is, while it seems like it takes time as well, just yesterday, you know, I was in secondary school, today I'm here, right? Sometimes as long as it seems like it's not also that very long. I always say that if you do nothing, 5 years will come. If you do nothing, 10 years will come. So it's important that you choose to do something so that when 5 years come, when 10 years come, you can see the results of what you're doing. And we at Construct and myself personally have made it a personal duty, you know, to always make sure that we're putting our actions, you know, where our mouth is. So we're not only talking about it, and we're tracking it. So any version of our organogram you see, there's always a key at the bottom left that shows male and female distribution. We track it, we look at it. We've had times when it has dwindled to, you know, 70-30, and we've said, what is the reason why this is so? And we've sort of deliberately sort of brought it back. We have times when it has dwindled to, you know, 60-40. At some point we're close to equal, you know, but it has to be deliberate, it has to be tracked, and it has to be, you know, done aggressively by us. And I think the same way we have a lot of negative examples, we can create a lot more positive examples through our daily actions and begin to spotlight those. That will be my contribution on this.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. I'm still waiting to see the hands, if any hands are up to make contributions. But till that, this sits at the center of the conversation that we're having today. I was reading somewhere in the course of the week where I think one of the executives in Bloomberg, I'm not very sure, but I think it was a Bloomberg article or video I was watching, where they were saying that in the next 5 years, 50% of global wealth is going to pass through the hands of women. And that an average of $30 trillion will be available for women within the next, 5 years. And some of the compelling underlying conversations around this is that women are known to want to do good. Women want to make investments with impact. Women want to use their wealth to impact the next generation. And they want to make meaningful contribution to society. So the theme for today is around why Africa must now prioritize property and wealth parity. What is the imperative of property and wealth parity to Africa's prosperity? And what is the urgency for us to now begin to narrow the gap?
Thanks to Sin. And I think to answer your question, I'll answer it in two formats. So one, I'll start in terms of answering what we stand to lose if we don't. And then I'll also just touch about what I am doing about this. And then I'll also ask for permission to leave because as I mentioned, I do have a flight. So I hope that's okay. So essentially, when we talk about what's the imperative to then act now, I think it's essentially in terms of what we